Hey everyone, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. On your way somewhere fun, Zion?
Yeah, where are we right now?
We're in New Mexico.
We're in East New Mexico right now.
Oh wow, that is fun. That's
Yeah,
very
we're heading,
exciting.
we're heading to Georgia. So
Oh,
yeah,
that sounds like a great trip. Thank you for the determination and commitment it shows to be in class even even when you're traveling like that. All right. Anybody have any questions? Oh,
sorry,
go ahead, Zion.
sorry if the internet just cuts out randomly. I'm
So
I
just gonna
understand.
apologize in advance because that might.
I understand. No problem. I do post the recordings. Make sure you guys are aware of that. If you ever have to miss a class or you are cut out in the middle of the class, on the homepage, there's a little link that says click here to see class recordings. They'll always be there. In addition, this year, Zoom has started giving us AI generated summaries. So I'm going to start posting a written summary. Now, as with all AI, it's parts of it will be right and parts of it will be wrong. So keep that in mind. It's not going to get everything perfect, but it does a pretty good job. So if you have to quickly refresh your memory about something, that's a good way to do it. All right. If nobody has any questions, we'll go ahead and get started with our class for today. All right. We are going to talk about what science is. We'll go into a little bit more detail about the scientific method today because it is so important. I want to make sure you guys are really good with using the scientific method. But first, before we do that, I want to talk about those grammar rules that I promised you last week. I would tell you what they are. It's important. Now, this is not an English class, so grammar is I'm not going to require quite as much of you in a science class as I would in an English class. But there are a couple things, really four rules that I'm going to grade on. These are things that I will take off a little bit of points in the near future if you get them wrong. So not a lot, just maybe like a quarter of a point for a question that has a couple grammar errors in it. So I don't want to punish you too much for grammar errors, but I want you to learn. You need to be able to use proper grammar when you're doing school assignments. Now, this is not applicable here in class. When you're typing in the chat box here in class, I don't care if you use text speak. It's perfectly fine to do that. When you are sending me a Canvas inbox message, that's fine too. Whatever it works there. I'm only talking about things that are graded. When you turn in a quiz question or test answers, or you do a lab report, or you do an essay, those kind of things are things that I want good spelling and grammar in. So there's a lot more to good grammar than this, but here's what I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for, well, we'll get to that. This is just a couple reasons, a couple cute little reasons here why grammar matters. The first one is having grandpa for dinner. The second one is having grandpa come to dinner. We're not going to eat grandpa. We're going to have him come and join us for dinner. All right. So the first thing I want you to do is capitalize the first word of every sentence and the personal pronoun I. No little lowercase I when you're referring to yourself. Also capitalize the names of specific people, places, and things. So last week you had a lesson where you had to write in about Francesco Redi. Francesco and Redi would both be capitalized because that's a name of a person, of a specific person. So capitalization is number one. Use full sentences in your written assignments. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. It could be a very short sentence like the flower bloomed or Bob painted. As long as it has a subject and a verb in it, it's a sentence. We actually would say a subject and a predicate, but for our purposes, most predicates are verbs anyway, action words. So it could be a short sentence, it could be a longer one. Just make sure that you capitalize the beginning, you use a full sentence, and you put a period at the end. It's best not to start sentences with the word because. There are a couple of times where it's okay to do that, but for our purposes, don't. It's best not to. Now, the times where it would be okay to start a sentence with the word because. One is when you have two parts to your sentence that are separated by a comma, such as because the plant did not grow, I hypothesized there was not enough water. That's okay. The other time is when you're in conversation. So if I ask you a question, if I say here, why do you think the plant didn't grow? It's okay for you to say, because we didn't water it enough. So conversation, but for our purposes, because this is a little bit more complicated, just don't start a sentence with the word because. The third rule for me is punctuation. Sentences always end with punctuation. A statement's going to end with either a period or an exclamation point, and a question is going to end with a question mark. All right, now those are the most important ones for my class, so they're the ones that I'm going to grade you on. Here they all are. Capitalize, first word and the letter I. Don't start with because, but do use full sentences and end your sentences with punctuation. All right, again, I will remind you a time or two, but then I will start taking off points. I will let you know when that time comes, when I'm going to start taking off points. Another important piece of information is to be sure that you're getting the announcements. If you didn't get the message this morning that we were having class today to your email, it means you didn't verify your email address or your parents' email, whichever one you used when you signed up for AIM Academy. This is really important because if ever anything comes up and I can't make it to class, or spur of the moment, there's some supply that you need to use, or there's some kind of an emergency that comes up with AIM Academy, let you know things aren't working or something. I will let you know through the announcements, and that will go right to your email address. So make sure that you have that verified. And also, when your teacher is late to class, the good rule of thumb is to give the teacher 15 minutes and then assume they're not coming. Now, I've never had it happen. I always come to class. I might be a minute or two late though, because I have a class right before this one. And if it goes a little bit long, don't at 2 minutes after the hour say, oh, class isn't starting. Just wait that 15 minutes, and then at the end of 15, you can assume that class isn't going to happen. Anytime up until then, it will happen. All right. I want to do a couple of get acquainted kind of questions, just so that we can get to know each other a little bit. I'll do some this week and a couple at the beginning of next week, just for some fun things to, give us to ice break a little bit. So type into the chat box, open up the chat box and type in your one-word answer to this question. Name something that makes you happy. One word. Horses, animals, sewing, basketball. What else have we got there? Animals, basketball, friends, traveling. Yeah, Luke clearly traveling. Well, he's gone now. Had some problems. Excellent. All of those make me happy too. All of those. That's great. All right, here's your next question. What is your least favorite food? Least favorite food. Meat. Olives. Oh, mushrooms. They're one of my favorites. Anybody else? Not everybody has a least favorite food. Some people just really like everything. Calamari. Kind of like chewing a rubber band, isn't it? Yep. Yes. Somebody just asked me, is it all right if we eat during class? It is. If you're going to be eating during class, it probably would be best if you turned your camera off during the time that you're eating, just for politeness sake. Shrimp. IKEA Swedish meatballs. Well, that's specific. That is very specific. All right. Another question. If you had 25 hours in each day, so 1 extra hour, what would you do with that extra hour? Sleep. Sleep, 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 sleep. Yeah, especially when you're in high school. Sleep is a premium. Basketball practice. Read. Yeah, I probably would read too. I'm one of the rare adults who doesn't use caffeine, so I don't like coffee or tea or anything like that. So I have to get enough sleep because I can't count on caffeine to keep me awake in the morning. So I always get enough sleep. So reading would probably be what I would pick. All right, one more. Using just one word, name something that drives you crazy. Nothing? None of you are driven crazy by anything. Loudness, siblings, gum, loud gum. Oh, just loudness. Yeah, loud noises. Yeah. Siblings always comes up every time I ask that question. I can tell you one thing, probably by the time you get to be an adult, your siblings will be among your best friends, but right now they're probably driving you crazy. That's pretty common. All right. All right, that's enough of that. Here's a joke for you. What do you call a tube that just finished 12th grade? Looks like you're thinking hard, Maria. We call it a graduated cylinder. Graduated cylinder. This is one of my favorites here. The human body is primarily comprised of carbon, which is abbreviated with a C, hydrogen, H, oxygen, O, and a little bit of sodium, Na. If we mix those all together and put them together, we are basically 100% nacho. And what should I do when none of you laugh at my jokes? I'll just keep trying until I get a reaction. Science teacher gets a reaction. All right, let's talk about science. What do you think of when you hear that word? First word that comes into your mind when you hear the word science.
Studying, observing the natural world, the study of the
Good.
natural world.
Good, excellent. Observation, chemicals. Yep, good answers. Test tubes. Very good. So you sent that just to me. Everybody look and see if there's a little red direct message after what you sent, that means you only sent it to the teacher. So if you want to talk to the class, set it to everyone in meeting. All right, here's the dictionary definition of, let me put this over here. Dictionary definition of science. It is a way of understanding the physical world based on observable evidence, reasoning, and repeated testing. So let's break that all down. A way of understanding the physical world. So we're talking about things that are matter or energy. Basically, they're made of matter, they have mass and take up space, or they're made of energy. We don't use science to study things like hopes and dreams and happiness and anger, consciousness, things that we can't really, that are not part of the physical world. So we use science to understand the physical world, and we base that understanding on things we can observe, evidence, something that gives you a ground for knowing about something else. Kind of, you can think of, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that, Bethany. Bethany says, is psychology not considered a science? So yeah, we will talk about that in a second. So it is a way of understanding the physical world based on observable evidence, reasoning, and repeated testing. So that repeated testing is what the scientific method is all about. So here's what evidence is. It's a direct physical observation of something, usually measurable, and the data that results from an experiment. So just taking a look at the sponges that are in this picture. So a lot of people think that sponges are plants. The sponges that grow in the ocean are not. They are animals. We'll learn about those when we get to learning about invertebrates, because they are a kind of an invertebrate. An invertebrate is an animal that doesn't have a backbone. So I have a poll question here for you. You can answer this. Here we go. Can science explain what a sponge eats? Thinking about what science is, a way of understanding the physical world. Can science explain what a sponge eats? You enter it by just clicking on your answer, then submitting that. Okay, I've got 5 of 7 of you have answered. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and I'll share the results with you. So you're all correct. Yes, science can explain what a sponge eats. We can observe a sponge eating and know that. So it is based on observable evidence. All right, here's a second question for you. There you go. Can science explain why a sponge likes to eat plankton and bacteria that it filters from the water? Okay, need a couple more answers. I got 5 of 7. All right, I'm going to end the poll. 3, 2, 1. Let's share your results. The correct answer is no. Science doesn't deal with what things like. It doesn't address things like liking something or loving something or being afraid of something. It doesn't have to do with emotion. Science is based on the physical world and the physical world only. Now, in your book, there was a section that was called Thinking Like a Scientist. So I want to talk about that a little bit because really a lot of problems in life can be solved if we think like a scientist. You can use the scientific method to help you find something in your room. We'll talk about that later. When we're solving any problem, there's a way that we can go about thinking through that problem that can be helpful. The first thing that we're going to do is we always start with an observation. We're going to observe in detail. So I want you to imagine this. Imagine that you're sitting in a dentist chair for half an hour, waiting for the dentist to get there. Now, during that half an hour, what are all the things that you might observe in the room?
The room's decor,
Yep,
the people around me also getting treated at the dentist. If there's any like sounds going on.
good, excellent. Yep, the lights in the room. Good. What else? The tools, the posters, the chairs. Great answers. The floor.
The room is, how dirty it is.
Yep. Hopefully it's clean and not dirty, but yeah. Yep. All right, you guys are all telling me things that, oh, the feeling of the seat. Now that's using a different sense. Until that one, you were using the sense of sight. But remember, observation involves all of your senses. So you would observe the feeling of the seat, the kind of fabric that it's made of, that you would use your sense of touch. You would use your sense of sight, hearing for the noise. Something about the sounds. Yeah, the smell. Dentist offices all have the same smell, don't they? You kind of would know that smell even if your eyes were blindfolded. You would know the smell. That's no problem. No problem. So yeah, those are things that we might notice. So the more detailed we can be in our observations, the better. So let's take another scenario here. We want to have some very detailed explanations and observations to help us design a good experiment to answer a question. So imagine that you're a scientist out in the field and you're observing elephants. On one side of this field, you observe a group of healthy elephants, or let's say you're in a jungle. You observe a group of healthy elephants on the north side of the jungle, but on the south side, there's a group of elephants that are mysteriously dying. So how could we make the observation of this even more detailed? Not just some elephants are dying. How can we narrow that down, make it a little bit more detailed?
Why they are dying?
Why? That's a good one. So we want to start with questions like why, what if, where, could it, would it? Good, good. But we can narrow it down even more than that. We can get even more specific in our observations. So the why is actually going a step ahead. That's going into the questioning. But let's observe the elephants themselves and the area around them. What else could we observe in that area?
You
Good.
could,
Testing, sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking that you could also observe if they have like any bugs on them, maybe like parasites, mites, stuff like that, that could
Yeah.
be hurting them.
Yep. So you said, I'm gonna read some of what you guys sent me. Testing the water, looking for other animals to see their health. What are they eating? What they eat, the environment. Yeah, all of these have to do with the environment that they're around. So we would want to see what was there. What kind of plants are there? What kind of predators are there? What's the water supply like? Do they have shelter? You know, are there parasites in the area? Those are all good things to observe about the environment. There are some things we could observe about the elephants themselves that might help us to come up with an idea for an experiment to solve this problem. What might we observe about the elephants themselves? Yeah, when they began to get unhealthy. Yeah, when did this occur? What else was happening at the time? Good, that narrows it down a lot. What about whether or not they're older or younger? The age of the elephants could make a difference. Whether they are male or female. Things are going to be different if it's only males that are dying, as opposed to if they're both male and female who are dying. So basically, the more detailed we can be, the better. Because a very detailed observation will lead us to a very detailed question. So again, talking about these elephants, think about the questions that we could ask that would be related to what we just observed. Really anything that you guys said. We could say the question might be, when did they start to get unhealthy? That would be a good question to ask. We could say, are there differences in the environment? Be the two. Something we observed, that's a question that we're asking. Are there differences in behavior between the two groups of elephants that allows one to survive while the other does not? So let's focus on, we have to pick one. So let's focus on just food. Let's say there's not enough food, or that's what we're thinking. That's what we're observing. We observe that maybe there's not enough food on the north side or the south side of the jungle where they're dying. What could we do to test that out? What could we do to test whether or not the lack of food was what was killing them?
Elephants more food.
Yeah, offer them more food. Very good. So there's really two ways we could do that. One would be to offer more food to the ones on the south side. The other would be to take food away from the ones on the north side. But as scientists, we don't like to do that, right? We don't like to harm living things. So we're going to try to find ways to answer our question without bringing harm to other animals. So we're going to go with giving more food to the ones that are on the south side of the jungle. Okay, so if that's what we're going to do, that's what we're thinking we're going to do. Now we can turn this whole thing into an if-then hypothesis. So we could say something like, if we give extra food to the elephants on the south side of the jungle, then they will stop dying. You see how now I know what I'm going to do and I know what I'm going to look for. So we know what I'm going to do. I'm going to give them more food. And I know what I'm going to look for or measure, the life or death of the elephants. So what's the independent variable in this hypothesis? Don't make me sing the song. More food, you got it. It's more food. That's the independent variable. It's the thing we change. Independent variable is the one you change. We're giving them more food. So then the dependent variable is the one we measure. That's going to be life or death in the elephants. Then we're going to do our experiment. And again, that's why it's such a good thing to have an if-then hypothesis. Because if-then tells us what we're going to do. It tells us our experiment. So we want to answer a question by searching for evidence using experiments. So an experiment is basically a test to see whether our hypothesis was right or wrong. And then we're going to do that experiment. We're going to gather the data, and then we're going to question the data. We're going to question our answers. What do you think that means, to question the data? You guys, you can see the slides that I'm showing you. Yeah, I guess you can if you were looking at that. All right, what does it mean to question the data? Make sure it's solid. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Questioning the data. If you do a math problem, we probably get to the end of a complicated math problem and say, I got to double check this and make sure it's right before I submit it. Basically, that's what we mean when we say question your answer. Just be skeptical. Good scientists are skeptical, and they never use just one piece of evidence to come to a conclusion. So usually they're going to have somebody else to try to validate their results, because just because we give these elephants more food and they stop dying, that doesn't necessarily mean they were dying from lack of food. Maybe before we gave them the food, they were eating something that was poisonous and that was killing them. So it wasn't the lack of food, it was the wrong kind of food. So it could have been another cause, something a little less obvious that was causing them to die. So often we have to do more experiments, and other people have to do experiments before we can confirm our own conclusions. So scientists question our answers. All right, let's skip ahead here. All right, I want to talk also about this word, the term theory. I know you had this in your book, but it's important to understand what we mean when we say theory. So a theory in casual use just means an opinion. That's just your opinion. It's a hunch, it's a guess. When we're talking scientifically, a scientific theory is more than just a guess. It is an explanation that is supported by evidence, and often lots of well-established and well-tested evidence. So theories are developed over usually long periods of time with repeated experiments done by multiple people. So an example of a theory that we believe now would be the theory that matter is made up of atoms. So you probably all believe that. All scientists now believe that because it really looks that way. It's a good, well-tested theory. Now, it is so well-tested that it is considered a fundamental principle of science. But when scientists find new evidence, they have to be able to change their theories. We learned about one of those last week with this experiment that Reddy did, where he disproved spontaneous generation. So that was the theory that living things came from non-living things. And you can understand why people thought that. I've had it happen that fruit flies are flying around in my kitchen and, okay, there's a rotting banana. They must have come from the rotting banana because they weren't there before there was a rotting banana. So you can kind of see why people thought that before they had a microscope. But then this scientist named Francisco Reddy came along. He didn't think it was true, so he did this experiment. So his observation was that little living things appeared on dead matter. So his question was, could the flies have gotten to the meat and laid eggs on the meat? What do you think his hypothesis was? Let's put his hypothesis in if-then format. If I do something, then something will happen. What did he do? What's the if part of that? Think about what he did in his experiment. Anybody? All right. If I close the jar with parchment, then the flies cannot lay eggs. Good. So that would be what he's going to do. That's our independent variable, covering the jar with parchment. The flies not being able to lay their eggs was what we're going to look for, the dependent variable. Now, he also just changed one variable, because if he had changed a lot, then we wouldn't have known what it was that caused the effect at all. So in this case, the independent variable was the thing he changed, the gauze or the parchment, and the dependent variable was what he looked for, the appearance of those maggots on the food. Now, there's another theory that has been disproven that used to be believed. This was really popular back in the 1600s. It was called the blank slate theory. And it basically said that when babies were born, they were a blank slate. They knew absolutely nothing. And everything that they eventually learned came from experience. Now, we know now that a lot of what we have is from our genetics. It's from our genes that we inherit from our parents. We also have some innate instincts, and those play a really important role too. So this theory was disproven. There is an important scientific theory now that is true, at least based on what we know. Now, as scientists, we have to have open minds. We have to always be willing to change our theory if we get new evidence that that would tend to prove that the theory wasn't, that doesn't support the theory. So one that's a central tenet of biology is the cell theory. So this is a really, really important theory. This is one that it's a good thing for you to try to memorize these three parts of the cell theory. The cell theory tells us that all living organisms are made of one or more cells. Could be a single-celled organism like a bacteria, or it could be a multi-celled organism like a person. But anything living is made up of at least one cell. The second part of the cell theory is that all cells have to come from another cell. They come from pre-existing cells. And the third one says the cell is the basic unit of structure and organization that performs life functions. Basically, what that means is cells do the business of living. Cells are where life happens. Life functions take place because of and within cells. So those are the three parts of the cell theory. Now we've got, we'll talk a lot more about the cell theory when we get to talking about cells in Bethany. I love that question. Where would the first cell have come from? No, we don't know. We don't know the answer. So when we start talking about evolution, that's one of the things I'll tell you guys. Evolution does not try to answer that question. Evolution does not try to answer the question, where did life originate? Evolution begins with life and says, how did we evolve from there? So we don't know where the first cell came from, and we don't really try to know. That's not something that we can go back in time and find the answer to, but it's a very good question. I love that you're thinking in that direction. All right, so back to talking about the scientific method. The really important thing about the scientific method is that it allows one scientist to reproduce another scientist's experiment. So when you think about baking a cake, if you didn't use the same ingredients in the same quantities every time, you wouldn't have the same cake every time. It would be different. So it's the same reason that it's important to use a similar method in science. And a big important reason to know and use the scientific method is that it is the basis for a written report or a lab report. You guys are going to write a couple lab reports in this class. You'll write one each semester. There might be a middle one in between there. I'm not quite sure yet, but there will be at least 2, maybe 3 lab reports that you'll write, and you will use the scientific method as your framework that you're going to use to write your lab report. So knowing the scientific method is actually really important. There are the steps right there. Observe, question. Often right in here, it'll say research. You'll do some research. Hypothesis, experiment, analysis, and conclusion. So let's use a little simple, silly, cartoony kind of an example of how we would use the scientific method. So the first step in the scientific method, as we can see right here, is observation. So let's suppose that you get 2 slices of bread. You put them into the toaster. You press the button, but your toaster doesn't toast the bread. Okay, in that scenario, what's the observation? It didn't toast. Yeah, that's our observation.
Can you hear me?
Toaster won't toast. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I thought you can hear me. I said something. That the toaster wasn't working. Sorry.
So the toaster, yes, you're observing that the toaster isn't toasting the bread. We're not necessarily observing the why of that yet. So this is that's kind of a comment that would cross both of them. The toaster not working. That could be part of the reason that it's not toasting the bread, but there could be other reasons as well. Maybe the toaster's fine, but there's other reasons that the toaster isn't toasting. What we're observing, you're using our senses to identify that the bread is not becoming toast. We don't have toast. That's our observation. Now we could be using our sense of smell. Bread smells different than toast. We could be using our sense of taste. Still tastes like bread. Our sense of touch. It doesn't feel like toast. Doesn't look like toast. Doesn't sound like the toaster is toasting the bread. We're using our observations in order to determine that I don't have any toast. So then the next thing we're going to do is ask a question that is based on our observation. So what question might we ask? based on that observation.
Why isn't
Why
the
didn't
toaster
it make-
toasting my? Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying the same thing. Why isn't it toasting?
Why? Why isn't it toasting? That's a good one. Why won't my toaster toast? That's a good one, but we can make that more detailed. And the more detailed we make it, the closer we're going to come to getting a good hypothesis and a good experiment. So there are other questions that we might ask that go beyond the why of that. We might ask something like, is my toaster broken? What else could we ask? What's wrong with the toaster? Is it plugged in? What other possible reason could there be? Are we on the wrong setting? Is it too low?
Oh, I was just about to say the heat level.
Yeah, heat level. Is something jammed? Is it broken? You guys are all sending just to me directly. I'd prefer that we all shared. It's up to you. I'm not going to tell you you have to, but yeah. So there's a lot of possibilities. Couple more possibilities could be, yeah, it's not plugged in. Couple other possibilities could be maybe there's no power coming into the house. Maybe the electricity is shut off. Maybe the outlet itself is broken. You know, we just want to make sure that we narrow this down as much as we can and think of all the possible reasons. Then sometimes we do research. You don't always have to do research. In this case, we're probably not going to go to the library and get out a book on toast and try to figure out why it's not working. But there are other things that we could do. What do you guys think you might do if this was you? You're standing in your kitchen and your toaster doesn't work. What might you do?
Well, first I'd probably check if it was plugged in. Then I check the settings. Then I would take something else like a water boiler. I'd plug that in and see if it worked. If it didn't work, I go, okay, it didn't. It's plugged. But if it did work, I think it's a toaster. I go back to the toaster. I look inside. I look outside. I check to see if it's clogged. You know.
Okay, good options. So Zion says, call my mom. Yeah, I think that's what most of us would do. That we would holler to somebody else and say, hey, anybody know why the toaster isn't working?
I would
Yeah,
say
so-
like
Go ahead, Luke.
maybe like if it's like a consistent issue, maybe looking up on the internet like why is my toaster not working? Maybe
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yep.
researching the internet maybe about that.
Researching the internet. Yeah. Basically what you're doing when you're researching is you're turning to someone who might have more knowledge than you do about the topic. So your mom might know why the toaster isn't working. If you say, hey mom, my toast isn't working, she might say, yeah, that's because the toaster's broken. Did you try plugging it in? There could be a solution. The internet could give you an answer as to what might be wrong with your toaster. See if your neighbor's electricity is working. Or yeah, that's a good thought because maybe the power's out on the whole block. So that's a possibility too. All right, so the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to narrow it down to one of those and we're going to construct a hypothesis and make a prediction. So remember that a hypothesis, when it's well written, if at all possible, is going to have two parts to it. It's going to have the statement part, and then it's going to have the prediction part. So it's going to be a potential answer to a question, and it has to be one that can be tested. A hypothesis must be testable. So we can't say the toaster doesn't like this kind of bread. That's not testable, right? We can't test that. So that's not a good hypothesis. Now, usually we're going to put our hypothesis and our prediction together in that one if-then sentence. So if we start with just the hypothesis, let's pick the outlet being broken because that's what this one did. So maybe the outlet is broken. Then the prediction is going to be what we would expect to see if indeed the outlet is broken. So so this is going to tell us what we're going to do. If I plug the toaster into a different outlet, then it will toast the bread. Now, what gets confusing here is the whole thing. This is called the hypothesis, and this is called the hypothesis. The hypothesis being maybe the outlet is broken. We also call it a hypothesis when it's together with the prediction. If, then, that's also called a hypothesis. I know it can be a little bit confusing. Hopefully we'll go over it enough times. For our case, just think, when you think the word hypothesis, think if then. That'll really help you. And not all hypotheses have to be written in if then format. So an example might be, we know that drinking this kind of stuff is going to rot your teeth, right? Drinking sugary drinks every day can lead to tooth decay. Just simply saying that is a valid hypothesis, but that's not written in if then format. So they don't always have to be. But I'd like you to, from my course, I want you to use if then as much as you can because of how valuable it is. It tells you what you're going to do, and it tells you what you're going to look for. It tells you the independent variable, and it tells you the dependent variable. So in this case, we have, if I plug the toaster into a different outlet, then it will toast the bread. Now, the next thing after making our hypothesis is to test it using just that one variable, the if, the only thing that we're going to change. In a good scientific experiment, we only change one thing, so we're sure what caused the effect that we see. So our test, what's our test going to be? Remember what our hypothesis is. What is our experiment?
Plug in the toaster elsewhere.
Yeah, yep. Our experiment is going to be plug it into a different outlet and try the whole thing again. So the one variable that we're changing in this experiment is
Outlet.
the outlet. What's the thing that we're going to look for?
So, I mean, the bread being toasted.
The bread being toasted. The outlet is the independent variable. The bread being toasted is the dependent variable. Everything else we're going to keep the same. If we changed the brand of toaster, we got a new toaster, and we got a different kind of bread, and we used a different outlet, we wouldn't know which of those three was responsible for what we were changing. So we control the other things. We call those the controlled variables. So now we're going to do our experiment. We run it. We plug that toaster into a different outlet. We try again. Now we analyze our data and we draw a conclusion. If that toaster does toast, hooray, my bread toasts, then we know our hypothesis is probably correct. Now we all want to question our results, so we're kind of going to want to run it again, but we can assume that it's correct. If it doesn't toast, sad guy, my bread still won't toast, then that hypothesis is not supported. It's likely wrong. Now we have to go back to the drawing board and make a new hypothesis. It clearly wasn't the outlet. Maybe now it's the toaster itself that's broken. Maybe it is electricity to the whole house. Maybe it is, a setting on the toaster that's wrong. So we're going to evaluate our data, and then we're going to finally, if our hypothesis was supported, the last step that we're going to take is to communicate the results. Now, scientists communicate the results in different ways. At our level, we're going to make a lab report. Usually, no matter what level we're at, even when you're in the field, when you're a scientist working in science, you're still going to write up a lab report, and then you're going to present that report somewhere. You're either going to talk to a small group of other students. You might give a talk at a large meeting. You might write an article yourself for a scientific journal. You might tell a journalist who's going to write the article for you, but in some way, you're going to let the world know what you did. You're going to let them know what the results were. You're going to let them know what you conclude as a result of this experiment. So here they all are again. These are the steps in the scientific method. Now, you might find different versions of this, but they're almost always going to include these steps. They might have different names. So instead of test the hypothesis, it might say experiment. But you want to analyze your results after you test to see if it supports your hypothesis. All right, so we have a couple minutes left. I want to give you guys an option. We can either do some small scenarios and you can tell me independent, dependent variable, or we can do a Kahoot. So if you want to do a Kahoot, put your hand up. If you know what a Kahoot is and that's what you want to do. All right, one. If you want to do the science scenarios, put your hand up. All right, we have more science scenarios. So let me pull those up. Hold on just a second here. Go. All right, here we go. So again, these are the steps in the scientific method. And I'm gonna skip over some of this because we just did these. All right, so let's start with Maggie and her plant experiment. Maggie read that some plants grow better if the soil is acidic. She can't believe that a plant can grow when exposed to acid. Maggie decides to test if the plants she has will grow better when acid is added to the soil. She puts potting soil in 2 planting containers and transplants 2 of her geraniums that seem about the same size into the pots. She puts the pots in the same location so they get the same sunlight each day, are at the same temperature, and make sure they get the same amount of water. However, Maggie puts a tablespoon of vinegar in the water she gives to one of the plants. She measures the growth of the plant every week for 5 weeks and records the results in the data table below. All right, what is her hypothesis? Remember, a hypothesis is if then. If I do something, then something will happen. What is her hypothesis? If
I add something acidic to the water, like this, she said that she can't believe it. So I thought it was that sorry, that it will grow better if I put.
you're on the right track. Yes. So it kind of throws you off there when it says she can't believe it, but she's trying to prove it anyway. And as scientists, we often do that. We often will do something, we'll do an experiment thinking one thing is going to happen when actually the other thing is what ends up happening. But she's experimenting in exactly the right way. So if I add vinegar, then it will grow faster. If I put vinegar in the plant water, so Luke, you would say it will grow better. We don't want a hypothesis to be a question. So you got it exactly right there. Just turn into a statement instead of a question. It's perfect. If I put vinegar in the water, then the plant will grow better. Remember the if then when you have a hypothesis. So what is our independent variable? Independent variable is the one you want to watch him again?
Independent variables are the ones you change. Independent variables are the ones you change. Dependent ones are what you measure. Controls will stay the same, whatever. Independent variables are the ones you change.
How many weeks in a row can I get that stuck in your head? We'll see. We'll see. All right. What's the independent variable? Yeah, Luke, you got it. Vinegar. Vinegar is the independent variable. That's the thing that's changed. What's the dependent variable? You have to look a little closer for that one. She is measuring the growth of the plants. And what is she measuring? The height of the plants. So it is the height of the plants that is going to be our dependent variable. That's what she's measuring. And tell me some constants there. Look at some of the controlled variables. Just name some of them that are listed there.
The height, the already existing height, the water, the temperature, the sunlight. Sorry, not the water, the sunlight. Because the water is the one that's going.
Well, she's going to be using the same water. It's just one of them she's adding vinegar to. So if she was using, say, reverse osmosis water and swimming pool water, that would be different. So she has to start with the same water, tap water maybe, or spring water, and then she'll put the vinegar in one of them. So those are all the things. Basically, everything else is stuff that she is going to keep constant. Now, you can see here that she did plants with vinegar and plants without vinegar. So she had a control group and an experimental group. Which one is the experimental group? The one with the vinegar or the one without the vinegar?
Vinegar.
With the vinegar, yep. And then the control one is going to be the one that is just water without the vinegar. All right, so let's evaluate the data here. What do you guys think? Does adding vinegar help plants to grow?
Because you can tell that it's getting that the one with vinegar is getting I mean, oh my God, it's growing faster.
Yes, it is growing. It is growing taller, faster in the same amount of time. At 3 weeks, it's taller. So they both started out at 10 centimeters. And at the end of the first week, there already was a difference. And that difference increases over time. So Maggie's hypothesis was, if I put vinegar in, then the plants will grow taller. Was her hypothesis supported by the data? Yeah, it was. It was supported by the data. Now she would write her lab report and publish her results. Let me see if I have a fast one here. Okay, here's one. 1 tank of goldfish is fed the normal amount of food once a day. A second tank is fed twice a day. A third tank is fed 4 times a day during a 6-week study. The fish's weight is recorded daily. All right, so this is the experimental part of the scientific method. So what do you think the independent variable is?
That each tank is given.
Yes, the amount of food. What is the dependent variable?
The fish's weight?
Yep, the fish's weight. The dependent variable is what you measure. She's weighing those fish every day, recording their weight. So it would be the fish's weight would be the dependent variable. The controls are going to be everything else. They have to have the same size bowl. They have to have the same decorations and rocks in the bowl. It has to be similar size fish. It has to be the same breed of fish. They all have to be goldfish. The temperature in the room has to be the same. There can't be sun on one and not sun on the others. We want to control all of the other variables for that. All right, I think we're going to end there. I'll do a couple more of these, each week for a while until you guys really get down dependent and independent variable. Although I think you're well on your way to that. So, anybody have any questions? We'll cut out just a couple minutes early if you don't, but I have time to take any question. Oh, you know what, Bethany, I wanted to answer your question. So hold on here just a second. So, Bethany asked, you want to remind me what your question was, Bethany?
If we're going just based off stuff like observable and then like the physical world, is psychology not a science?
Yes. So I have it right here, but I didn't get to that. Okay. So one of the things about a hypothesis is that it has to be what's called falsifiable. There are some sciences that you cannot have a falsifiable hypothesis for. That doesn't make them not a science. It just makes it difficult to do the scientific method when we use them. So it's important that a science, let me here, this one is an example. Things like psychology, economics, geography, political science, history, those are fields that it's not possible to have a falsifiable hypothesis in every case. Something like, think about theoretical physics or artificial intelligence. Are these sciences? Yes, they are. Psychology is a science, but in some sciences, we just simply have to accept the fact that we may not be able to prove what we know. Theoretical physics is an example. Psychology is an example. It is real. Thank you. Yeah, the things are actually on there. So there's my microscope and my thanks. Yes, so yes, they are sciences, but they would not be experimental sciences. I think that's where we would kind of draw the line. We would say they're not experimental sciences like biology is, like chemistry is. They would be more theoretical kinds of sciences. And sometimes the scope is a little bit limited. So in what ways might the credibility of a science be challenged when it is not falsifiable? Maybe, things like the nature of consciousness, which falls under psychology, the purpose of life, those sometimes fall outside the realm of the experimental sciences. So we just have to say there are some things that are beyond the scope of the experimental nature of science. I don't know if that hopefully that makes sense, but yeah.
It did. Thank
I thought about it because my brother is getting a degree in psychology. Yeah, yeah. These would be called social sciences. So they're a little bit different than the a lot of times the sciences like biology and chemistry would be referred to as hard sciences. You'll hear that term used, where something like psychology, geology, I'm sorry, not geology, geography, history, those would be called more soft sciences. It doesn't mean anything. Not when one isn't better than the other, they're just different. Yeah, good question.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks for your participation, and I will see you next week. Bye.